Joining me now is the opposition leader, Peter Dutton. Joining me is the opposition leader, Peter Dutton. Peter Dutton, thanks for your time. You said today the Prime Minister should now call an election on his changes. Why is that?
Because it's been such a significant betrayal of his trust that was instilled in him, that people voted for him in their millions, Andrew. That's the reality of what happened at the last election. And I think if you're walking away from it, you've promised it 100 times, and you are looking the Australian public in the eye and saying that I'm not going to do what I promised you I would do, I think the Prime Minister needs to refresh his mandate. And I think people need to be given the opportunity to pass judgment on his character and on his betrayal of the Australian people.
Well, you don't buy the line that he was spinning today. Look, circumstances have changed. We've had to change with it.
No, and what happens when circumstances change next year or a month after the next election? Does he then wind back the tax cuts that he's announced today? Well, likely. I mean, that's what he was very clear about today at the press club, that any policy is subject to change and nothing is set in stone. I mean, it was the most significant display of weak leadership that I've seen in my 20-odd years in the Parliament. It was quite remarkable, and he doubled down today, wouldn't apologise, wouldn't admit that he'd even made a mistake by lying to the public. And as it turns out, when you go back and fact-check what he said today, there are discrepancies, further discrepancies in what he's saying, which, again, I think the Australian public would be quite astounded by.
Such as?
Well, he makes out that somehow he's been given this letter of comfort from the Reserve Bank or from Treasury. It's a nonsense. When you look at what Treasury's had to say, there's sort of a bland statement about whether it's inflationary or not. It doesn't give any sense of how it's not inflationary, given that the independent economists are saying that it is inflationary. If it is inflationary, it's going to push interest rates up, or at the very least, keep interest rates higher for longer. So the Prime Minister's got a real problem here, a problem with credibility. I think he's destroyed his leadership and certainly destroyed any credibility that he had with the Australian public. And you can't go out there today misleading people. As it turns out, which again the Prime Minister admitted from his speech today, over the next 10 years, people will pay an extra $28 billion in tax to the Australian Taxation Office because of bracket creep as a result of the changes that the Prime Minister's made. Didn't make a line into his speech. And
look, as I said in the papers today, clearly the man has lied, and it's a broken promise, and his credibility will be shot. And yet it's has put a challenge to you, because to me politics seems clear. He wants to portray you, if you resist what is done, as an enemy of the tax cuts, the extra tax cuts is giving to lower income Australians, to poor Australians. Here's the rich Liberals again, you know, socking the poor Australians, the battlers. So I would have thought that you would have to fight for the stage 3 tax cuts that you and Labor did indeed both promise, but then match Labor's extra tax cuts for lower income earners. Is that indeed what you're going to do?
Well, Andrew, again, we've only just received the detail from the Prime Minister in his speech today. There's certainly many questions that we have of Treasury and of the Prime Minister, detail that we don't yet have. We still think there's a black hole in the Prime Minister's costings, so we need that clarified as well. And we'll gather all of that information, and then we'll be in a position to make an announcement in relation to our policy. What I think most Australians are concentrating on today is the fact that they've been deceived and that they've got a Prime Minister who has lied to them. And as you rightly point out in your column, it is a lie. There's no sugarcoating it. There's no saying that it was an off-the-cuff remark and it could have been interpreted either way. He promised it 100 times. And we need to get to the bottom of their costings and understand the impact on inflation, whether that's going to push interest rates up. I think the other important point to make is that it's clear that this position was taken after they saw the polling before Christmas in Dunkley. It's pretty dire for Labor, I've got to say.
Do you think there is enough money around that the the inflation problem won't be that huge if you did decide to not only keep the stage 3 tax cuts, but add the extra tax cuts for the poorer Australians that Labor promised today. Is there actually money for both?
Well, Andrew, again, it's a difficult question to answer without the advice in front of you, and we haven't seen that modelled. The government hasn't decided to keep stage 3 and implement their changes that they've announced today. It may well be that they've not done that, either because they don't have the money to do it, or secondly, because the advice from Treasury was that that amount of money into the system is inflationary, or it could have been both. But I don't have that advice. We need to do the modelling. We need to do it in a responsible way, not in a haphazard way, not based on what's in our political interest, but what is in the best interest of our country. And that will be the approach that we take. But I'm not going to make policy on the run or decide within hours of hearing from the Prime Minister when we still have questions that need to be answered.
Now, Peter Dutton, you've made national identity an issue for you, and it should be. I think a lot of people have run from it. You took a chance calling for a boycott, a shopper's boycott of Woolworths for banning Australia Day merchandise. It turns out, despite the scoffing that you might have gone too far and who's going to change shopping habits, you've got Woolies on the run. What does that tell you?
It tells me that that 2/3 of Australians, Andrew, are supportive of Australia Day. They're patriots. They love our country. And that's why we saw the outcome that we did in The Voice, not because people are racist or not because they don't want a better outcome for Indigenous Australians, but because they're sick of the Aboriginal industry and the waste that takes place. And they're sick of being told that we should be ashamed to be Australians. And the small, boisterous minority that you hear about on social media, or that the marketing division of Woolworths is worried about, or the marketing division of Cricket Australia is worried about, that is not the mainstream view in our country. And we've got to stop the self-loathing. We can have this discussion year after year for decades to come. It won't improve the situation for kids in Alice Springs. It won't improve reconciliation in our country. It won't improve economic outcomes for people right across Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. We should be proud of who we are. And if people don't want to celebrate Australia Day, we live in a democracy, that's their right. And if they protest peacefully, that is something that we cherish. But I know that there are millions of Australians who will celebrate another anniversary this 26th of January because as an Indian migrant into our country or a Chinese migrant into our country, they were sworn in, they became an Australian citizen on the 26th of January. Maybe last year, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 25 years ago. And they see it as a significant date for them. And why would we trash that? We shouldn't shun our history and we shouldn't be ashamed of who we are. We live in the best country in the world and the Prime Minister can't utter those words. He can't stand up for Australia Day. And I think it's a sign of incredible weakness of trying to please everybody and tell everybody what they want to hear. Woolworths has a job to deliver groceries, to provide support to their shareholders and to their employees, to get the best possible outcome for their shareholders, to have a good working environment for their employees. And what's happened at Woolworths is not that there was a reduction in demand for flags and other paraphernalia that people might buy for Australia Day. The people on checkouts and the people who are in management within Woolworths said, hang on, what Brad Banducci's saying doesn't align with my values as an employee of Woolworths. I agree with the customers who want to have a choice about what they buy in our store, not be told by some CEO on millions and millions of dollars each year whether they should celebrate Australia Day or not. Woolworths is a great company and they've got hundreds of thousands of good employees, but their job is to reduce prices and to take care of farmers and other suppliers and to make their business viable and profitable. Their job is not to tell me, not to tell you, or not to tell 26 million Australians whether it's right to celebrate Australia Day or not. And that's why I think it's worth standing up for, and I commend you and others who have had the guts to stand up on these issues for a long time, because we should be celebrating Australia Day. We should never forget our history and we should learn from it and be guided by it into the future. But this self-loathing has to stop, and I hope that this Australia Day is a turning point for us instead of the regression that we've seen from recent years.
And just finally, and on that point, I expect this to be a big issue from now on, because there's a sense of deep community unease about national cohesion, national pride being trashed. What would you actually do about it? I mean, there are two things that I'm thinking about. One is banning local councils from refusing to hold Australia Day citizenship ceremonies on Australia Day. 81 have said they won't. The government says fine. And the other thing is, I can't think of any other country that flies 3 flags rather than 1, 2 of them representing separate races rather than the national identity. Would you restore the flying of 1 flag, for instance, at your press conferences?
Well, a couple of points, Andrew. Firstly, I think we can legislate the 26th of January, and I think there would be broad community support for that. And Henry Pike, our local member for Bowman, is a very strong advocate. He's got a private members bill, and I think that should be given priority by the government in the Parliament, and I think we should enshrine the date. First point. Secondly, I think there is no dispute that we have 1 flag. Have a great respect for the Indigenous flag and for the Torres Strait Islander flag and other flags that you'll see flown at sporting events or elsewhere. People have pride in their culture and their heritage, and that's fine. But Australia has 1 national flag, and I think it's important for us to recognise that. It doesn't need to be disrespectful to other cultures, and we're inclusive as a country and all the rest of it. But we have 1 national flag. I think those 2 points are incredibly important. And in relation to the councils, that change in the position by the councils, by the mayors, has only been possible because of the Albanese government change to the arrangements that gave discretion to the councils. And they did it deliberately so that you would see the outcome that you just spoke of. When we were in government, the local councils didn't have that option. And I would return back to a situation where the councils don't have an option to play politics. Again, the councils are there to deliver services to their ratepayers. They're not there to have a view on international affairs and what's happening in the Middle East and spending taxpayers' money or ratepayers' money on social causes. They're there to provide services, and where they've got spare money, they should be reducing rates or improving services to their ratepayers. That's their remit, not to make political statements on our National Day. And I think the Prime Minister here has been quite tricky again in allowing the discretion for the councils, which has resulted in them refusing to have Australia Day ceremonies. I will go to an Australia Day ceremony in my local area tomorrow. I will be incredibly proud to be there to see those new Australian citizens, to recognise wonderful volunteers in our community. And I just say to every Australian, celebrate a wonderful day in the greatest country in the world, and make sure that, that you do it with pride. And that's what the 26th of January should be about.